Today, let's talk about making your own cables. Okay, so before I get started, I wanted to detail exactly what is going to be involved in the show. First of all, I'm going to talk about why you should make your own cables. Then I'm going to have a lengthy discussion with why you should use this type of cable technically. And then finally, I am going to show you how to build your own cable. So if you want to skip straight to the end of the video, you can use the chapter markers to do so. Let's face it, microphone cables and instrument cables are extremely expensive, especially the good ones. And for many years, I never paid too much attention to the cable that I was purchasing. As I got older and got more serious in the studio, I began to think more about the type of cable that I was purchasing. Then about 10 years ago, I decided to overhaul my live rig. And when I did that, I knew it was time to look at the entire massive bucket of mismatched cabling, quite frankly, junk cabling that I had acquired over the years. I wanted to go with something more uniform, and so I decided to build my own cables. And at the time, I remember asking my good friend Alan Goodwin about the build materials that I should be looking into for making my own cables. Now, I had learned to solder when I was younger, so I had some skill level with that, but I brushed up on my soldering skills by practicing, and then I ended up ordering the Neutrik connectors that he suggested, and then also the Canary Quad cable, which we're going to talk about here in just a minute. Now, it's worth mentioning, these cables that I'm going to show you how to build, you will be able to build on your own for about $10 worth of materials, maybe less depending on how long of a cable build you're actually needing to make. However, the retail price on these really high-end cables would probably cost you somewhere between $80 to $100. So it is absolutely worth your time learning how to build your own cables. Now, before I get into the technical specs of these cables, I did want to show you that when building these cables, one thing that's really nice about using these particular Neutrik ends is that they have colored rings that you can pop onto the end caps. You'll see I use a Pelican case. Inside the Pelican case, I have a color-coded chart so that whenever I'm at a live gig, anyone who is looking into that mic case can quickly see what length of cable they're looking for, and then can look in the case and quickly find, using the color codes, the cable that they need to grab so that they don't have a whole lot of excess or unwanted cable. Now, today I am going to introduce you to a very specific type of cable called Canary Star Quad. It is excellent at rejecting noise, and it's very high quality. My gift is not in explaining the actual technical aspects of this cable build, so I wanted to quickly have my friend Alan Goodwin come on here and give you the specifics of why you should use this type of cabling when making your XLR cables and your microphone cables.
How's it going? All right, we're going to talk today about mic cables and what the best types are and why they are the way they are. So let's start with just an idea of if you have an audio signal that you need to get from point A to point B via a cable. All you really need for that is two leads in that cable. You need the lead itself, which has the audio, and you need the ground, which is the negative, however you want to look at it. Normally the ground is a shielding around that lead. There are many problems with doing it this way. One is that one lead is normally really thin, so it can be fragile, it can be just easily breakable and not easy to solder, so many things about that. Another big problem is that even with that shielding around it, it's very susceptible to noise and interference that it picks up along the length of the cable, especially if your cable's over 5 feet. It's running along a stage or some area with other cables, hopefully not power cables, but definitely if there's power cables, high voltage, but even other low voltage cables, lighting, other audio, there's interference. There's a lot of noise happening around that cable. So there are several things we can do to fix this great problem of noise. The first one is the overall idea of balancing. Any XLR cable, hopefully, is going to be a balanced signal. The idea here is it's 3 leads instead of 2. Instead of a lead and a ground, it's 2 leads and a ground. And how this is helpful is the idea of balancing. What it does is the first cable is just the regular audio waveform. The second cable, a balancing circuit at the front end of it. You have to have a circuit for it. It's not just built into the cable. The circuit flips the polarity of the audio signal, so it's going backwards on a waveform for that second lead. So any interference that's picked up along the way is actually canceled out, because what that does is when you have the exact same waveform that's upside down, it's effectively nothing because you're canceling it out. It's +1, -1. It equals 0. So any noise that's picked up along the way is adding to that canceled out signal, and so it's basically creating a new waveform of just the noise. Then on the other end, the receiving end of the cable, it's called a differential amplifier. It's the other end of the balancing circuit. It takes those opposite waveforms and it flips back the polarity on the one that was flipped in the first place and reduces it by 2, or cuts it in half by 2 so it's not twice as loud. Then what that does is it flips the polarity on the noise that was picked up, so the noise is canceled out electronically and you get just your pure signal again. That is a balanced circuit. That is by far the best way to reject noise. You can do it over an XLR cable, a TRS cable that has 2 bands on the 1/4" cable, anything that has 3 leads and has a balancing circuit on either end. Very important. You can't just plug in a 3-lead cable and expect it to be balanced. It has to say balanced out and have an input that can take that. A few more things is once we have XLR cable and a balanced signal or a TRS cable, we want to have even better cable just to help with that noise rejection even more. And that introduces us to Canary Star Quad, or any kind of cable that actually has 5 leads total. You see them there. Now you notice that 2 pairs of 2 are actually the same color. That's because they're meant to be used together as a set of leads. So the 2 blues are meant to be used as 1 lead, the 2 whites are meant to be used as 1 lead, and then this is the ground, that's just the shielding. The reason for this, it's kind of similar to Cat 6 cable. If you've ever seen, there are 4 pairs of wires in there and they're each wrapped around each other, but the wrapping around of them is in a different rate from the other pairs. So inside of this cable, this is broken out right now, but inside the white ones are twisted up, twisted pair. The blue ones are twisted up but at a different rate. So not only do we have one given signal, whether it's the balanced reverse polarity one or the regular one, we have a given signal going over 2 cables now, better chance of success. We also have them twisted together to help retain that signal, and they're twisted differently than the other lead to help reject even from the other lead in there, because that's the biggest problem with not having twisted pair. Further than that, we have a shielding that's made of a silver, I believe it's straight silver, rather than copper or a cheaper metal. So it actually can withhold higher temperatures, it's stronger physically, it's just more conductive, it's just a better metal. Also, here's one that's unbroken. This is how the shielding comes braided. It's a very, very tight braid, which makes it a lot stronger physically, and it also makes it even more susceptible to noise getting in there. And it's really tedious to pick apart to get it like this. That's the one downside to it, but once you have it that way, it's a really strong lead that you can easily solder, and then you would want to strip both of these back, all 4 of them, and again twist the copper together, and then you solder that as 1 unit, solder that as 1 unit, solder that as a 3rd unit, and put heat shrink over them. And after that, you have pretty much your best scenario for noise rejection. You have a balanced signal, you have obviously a 3-lead signal, you have those leads that are over twisted pair, 2 cables, we'll call that one thing. Then you have braided shielding that is a good material and has a tight braid, all in great rubber as well. So many things good about this cable. It's a little bit more expensive than standard mic cable, but the benefits of this make long runs better, even short runs less susceptible to noise. So on an XLR jack, pin 1, whether female or male, it's actually on opposite sides of the, well, it's the same if you look at it the same direction, but if you're soldering it, it's the opposite side, which should make sense because they plug into each other. The braided shielding is always pin 1, and that's just how the jack is done. It is done as, you could effectively do it on any pins, that's just metal. But if you're trying to connect this cable to anything else other than itself, a console, a snake, another cable, a microphone, whatever it is, then it's industry standard for pin 1 to be ground. So even if you had your cable the same on both ends on this cable, the things you're plugging into are not going to be pin 1 as something else. So pin 1 is always ground. Now, which one you put these to, whether 3 or 2 is white or blue, it does not matter at all. I personally always do white on the top because that's easy to remember, but as long as that's the same on both ends here, no electronics or equipment know the difference. Some XLR is red and black on the inside, sometimes the same color, and you just have to remember which, or sometimes has a little stripe on the side. But the most important thing is that the shielding or the ground of any kind needs to be pin 1 because of the electronics.
All right, so the first step is to very carefully take the rubber shielding off of the cable. Once you remove that, you're going to have the braided cable underneath. You'll very carefully pick the braided cable down towards the end. Make sure you put the end cap on the cable before you get started with these steps, because otherwise it's going to be really difficult. Then you're going to shear off the rubber on each of the individual wired leads, and then you're going to twist the blue leads together, and then you're going to twist the white leads together. Then you're going to identify the pins. Again, like we said, you're going to want to make sure that the grounding is on pin number 1, and then I typically put blue lead on number 2 and white lead on number 3. When you're actually soldering, it is very important that you warm up both the wire and the actual connecting pin. You're going to want to get both the wire and the bare wire and the pin really good and warm before you hit it with the solder. Otherwise, you'll get what they call a cold joint and it won't get a good seal. So make sure you warm that wire up really good and the actual contact lead, that little cup that it's sitting in. Then you'll end up hitting it with the solder. Now, one step that I didn't do on these cables that most people will tell you need to do, once you've soldered the contact, you're supposed to wrap a little bit of shrinky tube around each of the metal contact leads and actually use a heat gun and shrink that tube down. I just didn't have any to show you on this demo. And then once I'm done with the female connector, I'm going to move on to the male connector, and I'm going to double check those pins, because you have to remember the pins are going to be backwards from the female connector to the male connector. I'm going to make sure that I find pin number 1 and put the actual braided ground cable on pin number 1. Then I'm going to move on to jack number 2, which is going to be my blue lead, and then 3, which is going to be white. And then once I'm done building the cable, I'm going to plug it into a cable tester. I'm going to click the knob and make sure that I have lights for 1, 2, and 3 to make sure that all the pins are connected correctly. So that's it. Make your own cables, save yourself a whole lot of money, and customize the cables to be exactly what you need. I have built my own instrument cables using a great quality of instrument cable that I picked up from the guys over at Sweetwater, and then I end up using the Neutrik's instrument connectors, and I can build my instrument cables really inexpensively as well, using basically the same principles of soldering, but we'll save that for another video.